Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Garston, and welcome to episode 88 of Tales from the Beat, where we discuss news and PR from both sides of the scrimmage line. And I'm really thrilled to have as my guest this week, Katie Merx. Now, she has definitely played both sides of the ball, a long and distinguished career, and her current role as founder of Merx Communications, providing communications and PR support for automotive, energy, and tech firms. That sounds like a lot of work, Katie.
Well, I keep busy.
You do. Now, when did you start your own firm?
Well, it started in 2020. I took a short detour to work for a local or nationwide agency based in Michigan,
Yeah.
and recently went back out on my own again.
Was it scary?
To be on my own, there's a
Yeah.
little bit of it that is, yeah, the restarting part, the making sure you have enough business, just takes a lot of hustle. All that high school athletics pays off.
Yeah. I was going to say, oh, you're a hustler. I thought it might be great, since I introduced you as someone that's been on both sides, kind of give people a background of really, where you started in your journalism career, and then we'll talk about making the jump.
Sure. Well, I only ever wanted to be a journalist.
Yeah.
From like second grade, there's a
Mhm.
paper I wrote where I was either going to be a spy, a gym teacher, or a journalist. And at
It's
some point, I realized that I was not good enough at keeping secrets forever. So I probably needed to go into journalism.
yeah.
I have gotten better at the secrets on the PR side,
Have you?
at least for a while,
Right. Yeah.
until they publish. So
Sure.
I started. I went to school for journalism at Northwestern University. Started by you probably remember there used to be these giant encyclopedia type books
Right.
that had every newspaper around the country in it,
Yes.
alphabetical by state. And
Right.
so I applied to daily newspapers in the state of Michigan, starting with A, and I had a job by Big Rapids. So I started at the Big Rapids Pioneer,
Uh-huh.
where I got to do a little bit of everything. It's very exciting.
Hmm.
Moved from there to a little bit larger paper in South Carolina, and then to my first really awesome job in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where I never expected to show up,
Yeah.
and was felt like there were a couple like top-notch reporters, but
Sure.
felt like I slid right into being part of them and got to
Yeah.
cover her. I covered the local government beat and got to cover hurricanes and disasters, and
Fun.
it turned out to be very good at crisis,
Yeah.
or disaster from the reporter side,
Right.
from our side and
Yeah.
from the PR side, and worked there for a few years. Had the opportunity to work with a newspaper that was owned by the same chain, the long beloved Knight Ridder chain.
Mm.
Up in North Dakota, they had a giant flood, and when people in South Carolina thought flood, they thought Katie. So they sent me up
Yeah.
there to get to help, and I worked
Yeah.
alongside like the star reporters from the biggest. I give myself goosebumps thinking about it. Working
Yeah.
with these people who I had just thought were amazing forever, from the San Jose Mercury News and the
Wow. Big
Miami
ones. Yeah.
Herald and the Philadelphia paper. All the big ones had sent their like top people, top photographer, top columnists, top editors, and I was 20 something and got to sit among them and
Yeah.
listen to them do their job. And only for the couple hours we were in the same place, because we were driving
Right.
all to North Dakota covering this
Right.
flood.
Yeah.
So and that paper won the Pulitzer, and when they won it, they sent each of us a plaque for our piece of the Pulitzer,
Nice.
which is a corner in my office behind a bookshelf.
Wow. Wow. You got Pulitzer on your wall.
Yeah,
I
well, a
mean,
piece of one.
a piece of
And
one. Well,
yeah,
I'd take a piece of it.
yeah, well, it helps people read your resume at the very
Right.
least.
Yeah.
And but it was an amazing experience. And the
Yeah.
reason they won the Pulitzer was because the newspaper chain gave that newspaper out for free for I don't know how long, like a month, to
Yeah.
everyone. They delivered it. Nobody was in, everyone was displaced. The
Wow.
reason they had people from other papers come in was to put out the paper while the people who live in Grand Forks, who were working for the paper and affected by this, were able to take a couple
Mm.
days here and there to take care of their own issues. So
Sure.
it was just an it was a so that they won it because they did the right thing over and over and over. They kept
Hmm.
putting out the news. Like there were whole pages of just directories of how to find. It was
Oh, sure.
before the internet had really taken off. It did
Right. Yeah.
exist, but none of us had phones with anything.
Uh-huh.
We didn't even have Palm Pilots.
Right.
Anyhow, So that's a long stop in Myrtle Beach there. And then
Wow.
at some point, I was always dreaming of, I don't, this sounds so silly, being Lois Lane, being in the big leagues.
Yeah,
And,
right.
but I was never coming back to Michigan where I was from. So the
Yeah.
next step, definitely back in Michigan. So
Hmm.
the strike between the Detroit newspapers was over, and I was naive and the internet was young. So I
Mm,
thought that meant it was over. So it
right.
was technically. They talked taken everybody back who didn't have a legal dispute with the paper. And so
Right.
I took a new job. And I
Nice.
started in July of 1998. And I sat right between somebody who'd been on strike the whole time and someone who joined the paper 2 weeks in up to the strike and was still there.
Wow.
So it was a really eye-opening experience,
Sure.
working for the Detroit News. And
Hmm.
but again, got to cover, I worked in a couple different bureaus while I was there in downtown on the weekends doing
Yeah.
cops and
Yeah.
crisis, and learned a lot from people who've been journalists for a really long time,
Sure.
and learned a lot about how the world turns, right? Working with
Right.
people who had sat on different sides of essentially
Hmm.
a, a war. So
Yeah.
I only, but it was also very stressful, and I'd been a little naive about how that would work. And after a couple of years there, one of my good friends who, Gene Shabath and Bob Ankeny were friends, and they both worked
Mm.
at the papers before the strike, and Gene went back to the paper after the strike. And Gene introduced me to Bob, who was at Crane's Detroit Business, and helped me get an interview with Phil Nussel, who's now at Automotive News.
Yeah.
And I was hired at Crane's Detroit Business, where I worked for 5 years with some amazing people. I think you've interviewed almost all of them at some point on
Probably.
your podcast. Uh,
Probably.
and it's quite the fraternity. And so I went to work at Crane's Detroit Business, where I started covering technology and finance. And then eventually it evolved to be covering finance and healthcare, which were two pretty big, meaty beats that I loved.
Mm.
And also had a dating column monthly, I think,
A
and
dating couple.
for Crane's Detroit Business of all places.
Wow.
Yeah.
A business dating?
Well,
Wow.
it was when the business of dating, I mean, I'm sure it's always been around,
Yeah.
but it's when speed dating was starting and online dating was starting, and all
Wow.
of those things were just starting to come to Detroit. So there actually was a business angle, even though my
Oh,
column
okay.
a
Were
little
you
bit of,
matchmaker Merx or what?
yeah. Well, it was more like match make me, please,
Okay.
at the time.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I worked there for 5 years, learned a
Yeah.
lot. They sent me to Wharton, like they sent a lot of the reporters to Wharton
Hmm.
for the intensive financial training for journalist program.
Right.
Worked with amazing people. And then Phil Nussel had gone to the Free Press. And so then I joined the Free Press
Yeah.
and was
Yes.
initially covering healthcare, and
Okay.
then and next to the auto team. And healthcare
Sure.
in Metro Detroit, of course, involves a big chunk of covering automotive, because that's a
Hmm.
big client for that service.
Sure.
So, and a big driver of what happens here. So that evolved to, as somebody from the auto team left, I took over the Chrysler beat for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then the GM reporter left and I took over the GM beat, which
Yeah.
is,
Wow.
pretty
Yeah.
amazing beat to have.
Oh,
So
yeah.
covering a big global company, it allowed it. I didn't get to go on the fancy drive only trips like the
Oh, they
vehicle
were
reporters do.
awesome. Because that was my
Yeah.
beat at the news when I worked there. They had some great fancy. We can go on and on about that. I
Yeah.
mean, where they go, oh, we're staying in the same place. Jen and Brad Pitt went for their honeymoon. I go, oh, well, that's nice. Well, I hope to fall in love. But
Yeah. Well, I got to go on
yeah,
several pretty fancy trips, but not those ones.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
to go, like I traveled to China to cover, and the Free Press at the time, we had to pay our own way, or at least pay what they told us our own way was. So we
Yes.
contributed essentially to be able to go to try to keep our ethics up, and the rules have all changed, and it's neither here nor
Sure.
there. But um, so I got to go to China several times for
Nice.
work and cover the auto show, and Geneva,
Hmm.
and it was a really fantastic, fascinating beat. You're talking to
Oh, yeah.
industry leaders, right? And
Right.
you're little old asking questions that make people a little nervous. I remember,
Yes.
and I've heard you, I re-listened to some of your other interviews to
Right.
get ready.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
one of the things I remember asking those GM PR people who were
Hmm.
an industry in themselves, right? And really
Yes.
professional, know what they're doing, just like the people we worked with at Fiat
Right.
Chrysler. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a second.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I remember saying, but what are you doing when you're not talking to me? I really don't understand how
Yeah.
you're filling your day. I
Yes.
know you're busy. I can tell you're busy.
Right.
I don't understand what you're doing.
Uh,
So, of course, now we both know. But
yeah.
the
Yeah.
so worked at the Free Press, and then Phil eventually left, and then Jamie Butters became the editor, and then Jamie moved
Hmm.
to Bloomberg, and then I moved to Bloomberg, where I still covered
Wow.
GM. But at that time, and this gets to your how did you decide to cross the dark side question that
Yeah.
you always ask. So I went to Bloomberg, which for those who don't know, is um, one of the things that they offer to the people who pay a lot of money to their service
Hmm.
is that they will have the news first, no matter what it is, the biggest, the
Yes.
smallest, the trendiest, whatever the most, whatever the
Hmm.
important thing is happening
Yes.
on a beat like General Motors, they will have
Right.
it first. So it's high pressure, and first means
Oh,
by
yeah.
milliseconds sometimes. And
Yes.
it's fun to beat people by milliseconds. Reuters is also
Yes.
impressive and has great,
Uh,
but it's also a lot of stress. And I had a 3-year-old in a failing marriage
uh,
and an infant. I started at Bloomberg 8.5 months pregnant during the auto
oh
show.
no.
So I worked a
Boy.
few weeks and was off a few weeks.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
and
crazy.
as
Yeah.
I, on my last Monday before I went back to cover GM for Bloomberg, I had the baby on my lap and the 3-year-old on my feet and Obama
Jeez.
on the TV screen
Wow.
putting my beat into bankruptcy. And I remember thinking, well, it's been good
Well,
knowing you girls. So
that's enough. That's enough for me.
yeah.
Oh
So
God.
went back and
Yeah.
covered them for a while, but it's not covering a beat like that in bankruptcy period for any outlet would be high stress
Yes.
and very difficult on a
Oh
family.
yeah.
Doing it with an infant and 3-year-old,
Oh
it just so that's when I
yeah.
about a year later I switched to the gray
Yeah.
side because I
The
started
the
at the
gray
University
side.
of Michigan in their
Oh,
public
okay.
affairs department,
Yes,
which
that's
is
right. I
a
remember that. Yeah.
yeah, fantastic foundation for learning all the parts that
Hmm.
I didn't know about what happens
Yeah.
behind the screen. I'm talking too long. And so I worked there. And then as soon as I got there, Fiat Chrysler started calling and saying they're going to do an IPO. They need a financial communications person. And so
Right.
I said, well, I can't leave right away. I just got here. But
Yeah.
eventually I couldn't pass up an IPO. So I joined Fiat Chrysler when you and I worked together.
Hmm.
Got to do several pieces of several IPOs. The one we did the IP without the O, and then
Right. Yes.
the IPO where we launched at
I.
the
Yeah.
Fiat Chrysler on the New York Stock
Yeah.
Exchange, where we have a picture together,
We do.
and then
Okay.
helping get the Ferrari IPO
But
ready to go
it's a
until
but
they
yeah.
up their staff for that,
Sure.
and then
You
went
know,
from there to sorry, go ahead.
no, no, it's funny when I'm glad you said that we worked together. Fiat. I couldn't remember which permutation of Chrysler. I think there's more versions of Chrysler than Law and Order were on TV because you never knew. Who am I with the Germans, the Italians, the
Right.
three-headed dog? Who are we working for? But I know I was surprised when I saw you show up. I went, all right, there's another one, and I don't blame you. I started there in 2005 before all the just before it was still Daimler. And I thought about all you reporters covering the bankruptcy and calling up and begging for interviews with the CEO. And I actually had a producer from CNBC cry because we didn't let them go first. And said, that's our policy is to go first. I went, well, that's nice. That's like the Washington Post calling me and said they have a policy of always beating the New York Times. And I said, well, you tell your boss tough crap. We'll decide that. But so what did you? I'm going to move ahead because
Yeah.
what did I know that covering the auto industry for a long time, you have this vision of what the PR machine is like at these giant multinational companies, and then you get there. And I always tell people I was alternately horrified and educated and surprised at how, and I don't mean to be a jerk about it, but I mean how little PR people knew about the news process and what it takes to really get a news story either in the paper or on the air or now of course, online and or streaming or all the many other versions, ways
Yeah.
people can get their news. But I was just curious as to what did you find when you jumped over to corporate and saw it from the other side and you saw, okay, now this is what's been going on, what I've been trying to get stories out of these people.
Yeah. Well, I was surprised by just how much approval needs to happen
Mm,
and how varied the involvement of PR people can be.
yeah.
So it made me rethink of all these conversations I'd had with GM PR people over the years, right? Like,
Mhm.
and then know, oh, this person who claimed not to know anything for sure knew everything, right?
Mhm. Yes.
And but this person over here maybe really knew even less than I thought. Like, it's just
Yes.
right. So depending on your role and the people, the executives that you're working with and the team that you're
Right.
working with, you may be completely integrated and
Yes.
um, know exactly what's be in the room. I've been in roles where I led the 30-person earnings call meetings, like not the I led the earnings call, but
Mhm.
just, technically, but
Right.
the meeting of executives where we came in and I sat and I led the room as a PR person. And I've been
Wow.
in positions where
Yes.
like I don't know what's happening until they give me a
Yeah.
draft and I fix it up a little bit, to be the
Right.
way that in the AP style that journalists use
Yes.
and fix a little grammar and maybe suggest some um, writing that's more clear for the average person to understand.
Yes.
And and that's that. And they take it or they don't.
Or they
And you
don't.
maybe
Yeah.
try twice on the things that really aren't
Yeah.
clear, and then you have to put it out anyhow and hope that you
Yeah.
will get to talk to the reporter about
Sure. Yeah.
what this
Well,
means.
when you talk about approvals, the first one I can remember is when we started this Firehouse blog for Jason Vines, who was the head of PR, and he was a funny guy, and it was all about planting stories and responding to journalist stories, and he wanted to have this animation. We were still with the Germans then, so he wanted to have something called a Scheiße cow, where the little cow would run across the screen over his blog post, basically taking a dump on the reporter's stories. And it took a 3-hour meeting to decide on all the. We had the web firm do renderings of what this Shiza cow would look like and how it would run across and take a dump across the street and the shape of the dump. And it's a, oh, no, only in corporate America would you
Right.
have to
Right.
argue for 3 hours what a cow taking a dump on a screen would look like. And how much it was fun, I guess, but I just couldn't believe it. I went home and just was telling my wife. I said, "Well," she said, "What'd you do today?" I said, "Well, spent 3 hours talking about a cow taking a shit on a screen." And she said, "Okay, well, that sounds about right, for
Yeah.
corporate America." So, looking at the climate, the media climate today, we've seen so much consolidation. I mean, it's really sad to see papers go under. Website, I see Autoblog is I think is being discontinued.
Yeah.
Really, and they've done such wonderful stuff over the years, but talented people out of work. Now, as a PR person, what do you see as far as the landscape in media, as far as what's available to you, and how you have to adjust your tactics and really trying to place a story?
Yeah, it's a challenge, as you know, and everybody you talk to knows. The media industry has been shrinking um, for both of our careers,
Yeah,
and there's fewer reporters. There's some stat out there. Again, I think I heard somebody else when I was cribbing for the
yeah,
interview,
yeah,
uh, quoting it's like 6 or 7 PR people for every reporter, right? So
right,
and we talk to any reporter we talk to, that all the people we've known forever, they get hundreds of
yeah,
pitches a day. I
sure.
mean, I'm sure you do,
Yeah, I mean, I
and
don't
you're
even work full time.
semi-retired.
Yeah, but and I get them, not as many as a full time reporter. I get a lot of them.
Only
Um,
half are from me.
yeah, but yours are always good, and that's the next thing I want to get to, is that how, as a reporter, as a former reporter, why, how you use that skill and your empathy for reporters in shaping your pitches, and how that makes them perhaps more successful.
Well, um, one, I'd say short. I work
Mhm.
really hard with the teams that I've had that I worked with, and younger
Yeah.
people in particular,
Mhm.
to explain that the most important part of getting a pitch accepted or at least read is
Yeah.
to build relationships.
Yes.
So it's learning what the other people, it's reading what they write, it's watching what they
Mhm.
post, it's right
Yes.
looking what's interesting to them on LinkedIn. Like just watch and try to
Right.
introduce yourself. Like go where
Sure.
they are. If there's
Yeah.
a automotive press association event, go to that. If
Right.
there's a auto show, let's try to get you to that, right? It's building relationships so
Mhm.
that there's at least a little more inclination to open an email or to answer the phone, right? And
Yes.
then once they do it, get to the point. Everybody learned that anybody who's taken PR or journalism has had to learn about the old-fashioned inverted triangle. And right,
Yes.
so the most important thing first, and obviously there's sometimes when you change that for future stories, but
Mhm.
most important thing first and get to the point.
Get to
So,
the
and
point.
how does
Yeah.
it relate to what you're pitching? Or how does
Yeah.
what you're pitching relate to what they care about?
Right.
That's it. And like a couple words in the subject line.
Yes.
And then, hey, I've got a client that does this, it's related
Mm.
to this,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
And
nobody's
it's so
scrolling,
appreciated. It's
but they're
so
probably reading it on their phone.
Yeah, yeah, because I've got this one guy at this one firm. Over the years, he sends me pitches that are almost 500 words. And I've told him before, I said, I'm not reading this. I said, I don't need you to write my story for me. I mean, just tell me what it is. And he keeps doing it. And so now I don't even respond to him anymore because it's ridiculous. I mean, who's got time for that? Uh, and as it turns out, there isn't any story in it after
Right.
500 words. So um, yeah, no, and that is appreciated. And now we just worked on a story
Yeah.
recently,
Couple.
a couple, but this last one about the shape of EV sales, and I just find the EV story. I'll put it in a way sort of confounding because no one. You see how it's covered. I call them. They'll get pissed off. I call them EV fanboys. Some reporters that they just don't see both sides of it. It's just okay, EVs are an eventuality, and they're great, and they're wonderful, and it's better than dark chocolate. And others sort of play it down the middle, and you're representing a company, a M&A dealer firm,
Yep.
advisory firm that had a great study and insight on the shape of EV sales, and we kind of melded it in a larger story with
Yeah.
other
Thank you.
things. But I'm just curious as to you coming from a journalistic background that's also uh, pitching stories on the subject, how you find that particular story is being told. Do you think it's being told fairly and accurately, or is it too much advocacy going on in one part? I'm just curious as to way you're seeing it, and if that also shapes the way you pitch stories related to that.
Right. Um, I'd say there's a little bit of all of it, right? There's some
Mhm.
people who are fan boys or girls or people, fan
Yeah,
humans, and then there's other people who are covering the news that comes out, right? There's this fire hose of news,
yeah,
uh, and they're all trying everybody's trying to figure out how to cover it efficiently, effectively to the needs of their organization, right? So some of these EV specific places, their readers want to know what's happening good, right? What's the good
yeah,
stuff happening? And they share, I think a lot of them are still sharing some of the roadblocks or hurdles that are interacting with or
yeah,
that they're interacting with. But um nuanced stories, right? That nuance is hard to stick in a lead. When we just talked
yeah.
about put the most important thing first,
Right.
it's not there. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
And the report you referenced from Dave Canton Group that just went out that had some good information about the EV
Mhm.
industry, I think is a pretty has a pretty nuanced look at it, right? They're not saying they're going away. They're not saying they're taking over. It's there are different propulsion systems have different benefits, right? So like
Mhm.
EVs not there yet for heavy trucks in many cases. There are some. It's
Mhm.
good for in the city, right? It's good
Yeah.
for delivery and things like that. It's good for passenger cars if you have a way to. There are still hurdles, right? Like if
Right.
I'm going up north I probably don't take an EV yet because I'm a little nervous about
Yeah.
working chargers on the way there and on the way back.
Hmm.
But I have there's a story on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that you're familiar with called the A-head. It's the
Yeah.
trend or fun story that's up there. Whatever
Uh,
that story is, I either just did it, my friends just did it, I'm
yeah.
thinking about it, like whatever that story is. Everybody's
Yeah.
buying 10 turkeys this year for Thanksgiving. I just did that. Or
Yeah.
everybody just paid off their mortgage, whatever
Hmm.
the thing is.
Yeah.
Like I'm right there in the average businessy person reader of Wall Street Journal. A bunch of my friends just leased EVs, which I think
Yeah.
underscores the point in that Dave Canton
Yeah.
Group uh, report, which is that it's happening, but it's the expectation that we could go in 10 years from all internal combustion to all EVs is unrealistic.
Yeah.
Instead, we're seeing a steady rate of EV adoption. It's
Sure.
still growth year over year.
Hmm.
And it just, the total turnover without paying everybody to turn in their cars to have an EV wasn't going to
Right.
happen.
No. Yeah. I mean, it's a crazy story. I remember, I don't know, it was 2 Christmases ago at the Auto Press Association, and GM CEO Mary Barra was the fireside chat, and it's so much more friendlier than a news conference. So you don't really get to press them. And I asked her, "Isn't it a gamble for GM? And how will you know if it paid off?" And she gave me some. I'm just saying BS. Well, if you sit in an EV, you're going to love it so much you're going to want to buy one. And it was too nice a environment to say, well, that's BS. Um, I could sit in a Bentley and say, well, that's wonderful. I just don't have several $100,000 to buy a nice car like that. But I would love it, sure.
Right.
Someone gave me a Bentley, or convenient monthly payments. I might
Right.
go for it. Yeah,
Well, and that's the other thing, right? Is it's
yeah,
they need to there's a pressure to sell more, and what we're seeing now is that the OEMs are adjusting this money they're spending on
yeah,
switching completely over, right? So that there's more
sure,
balance to it. Um, and it has to be profitable in the long term. They know that sometimes with new product you lose money in the beginning, right? But you can't keep losing money on it. So
sure.
and people and we all have to budget. We all have to pay our
Right.
bills, buy groceries in addition
Yeah.
to a car. So
It's funny. I was talking to my wife today about change, and uh, comparing it to people. This is really often, but going from black and white TVs to color TVs. And I'm old enough to remember that. And I actually have a textbook from college, radio and TV textbook, that says one day color TVs will be the standard. But really, wow, that would be amazing. And It's like reading this stuff about EVs today, but it's fascinating. So we have time for just one more thing. So what's next for you? What are you working on next
well,
that you can
immediately,
talk about? Yeah,
yeah, immediately I'm headed up north to Traverse City for the Center for Automotive Research Management Briefing Seminars to do a little networking and talk to people about that new
yeah,
report from Dave Canton Group and
yeah,
Kirby, which is a company that based in the Silicon Valley that works with dealerships to offer remote mobile service. So we're help them figure out all the back side information, how to schedule, how to use AI to make sure your people have all the right things in the truck and then get
yeah.
your oil changed or your cars rotated in your own driveway. So those are
That's
the
cool.
companies that are taking up most of my time right now and
Yeah,
hoping to do a little more talking about them, talking to a couple of others that hopefully
yeah.
you'll read the emails about in the near
All
future. And
right. I'll read your story pitches.
yeah,
We always need stories, especially from when I see a pitch from Katie Merx. I know I'm going to open it.
thank you.
When I see one from the guy that sends me 500 word pitches from X company, that's I go, well, I guess it's time to move on and see what's in my spam filter. But Kate, well, I hope you have a great conference that's profitable for you and productive. I miss going up there. I haven't been up there in years. I think the last time was when I was working at Fiat Chrysler and supporting the late wonderful Sergio Marchioni, and ironing that backdrop that came through the mail all full of creases. And I was using my pants steamer from my suitcase trying to flatten that thing out. But I hope you have a great time up there,
Thank you.
and it's been wonderful to talk to you, Katie.
You
It's
as well.
great, and Best of luck to you. Merx Communications. Did I say it right?
Yep.
All right. Merx. I want to see a big thing. Merx Communications, the fastest rising PR firm that's not from Big Rapids. And but it's great. All right, Katie, thanks so much. And everybody, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tales from the Beat. I'm Ed Garston. We'll be back soon with more tales. Take care.